Miracles, Archons, Anunnaki, Reptilians, fallen angels, ancient astronauts, celestial bodies, Summerians, Egyptians, Greek mythos, Pantheon, Zeus, Marduk, Dr. Rita Louise, latest leak project. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Rita Louise with us from soulhealer.com, justenergyradio.com, Just Energy Radio on YouTube, and Dr. Rita Louise on Facebook. Now, we talked to Dr. Rita a while back. We had a great conversation, and she has a new film coming out in just a few days called Holy Deception. So we're going to dive into that, and great to speak with you. How the heck are you?
I'm doing great, Rex. Nice coming back on the show, and you are my first interview on this new project, so I'm just so excited to be here and get to, release it with you. Yay!
Yeah, this is great, and I had a chance to, watch some of it. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but the information that I got so far is amazing, and I think it's going to do really well once it's released. If you would, for our audience, let's talk about it. What have you compiled in this that will really make people sit back and just go, this is incredible?
Well, I think, in the biggest picture of the whole thing, one of the things that I give the viewer is I make them ask questions. There are things that we believe. There are traditions and concepts that we were all brought up with. Especially what I cover in this film is our notion of God. And I've done a number of films, and the comment that I'll get from some people is, but she didn't give an answer. And it's like, well, it's not my job to give an answer. It's my job to make you question yourself and dig within yourself and come up with your own answers. And so what I do is provide information. I mean, I'm really big on looking at mythology and customs and history and the archaeological record and those kinds of things, and providing the viewer with this bed of information so that they can make their decision, because our beliefs are our beliefs, and it's not up for me to tell you what to believe. You need to decide what you want to believe.
That's a good point, because I wanted to bring up that a lot of times on Leak Project, people will leave these silly comments in the comment section and say stuff like, oh, well, Rex, you tell us what you believe. You're still agnostic. Why don't you believe in this yet? And it's really not about me. It's about the person that's watching the film or the podcast or listening to the archives, and they can make up their own decision. It's not really up to us as a journalist or somebody that's bringing this data to the table necessarily to come up with a specific solution for them, unless you bring that up at the very beginning. So I appreciate that. And I've read through so many ancient texts, like, obviously the Old Testament and the books in the Old Testament, but also the Nag Hammadi treaties that talk about the Archons, many books that were taken out of the Abrahamic canon. And I read through it, and what some people used to call gods or angels or, things coming from the heavens, I think to myself, this is describing some type of technology. Your film also really correlates a lot of that as well.
Well, exactly. And I think, just, to kind of go into this, I think we really need to talk about what our notion of God is first, to kind of get into more of the meat of, some of these religious texts and philosophical texts that we're really talking about, but, like the Archons and stuff, because everyone has, regardless of where you are in the world, this basic belief in a divine being of, this omnipotent creator. I'm kind of a Trekkie, and one of my personal favorite characters on Star Trek is the character Q from Next Generation, and he was on Voyager, which he was pretty funny on Voyager. But anyway, and he was omnipotent, and he would snap his finger and a universe would be created, or he would have changed his outfit, and he was omnipotent. And our viewpoint of God is of this omnipotent creator. Now, whether people believe he has a form or a sex, whether it's just a consciousness, an energy, or a vibration, I don't know. I don't claim to know. And, when my kids were young, I would just say, it's just God, because it's something I don't have the answer to. And I don't think anybody on Earth has a real understanding or can have an understanding from our viewpoint, because we're not omnipotent. We don't understand everything that's going on in the universe. We just know our three-dimensional universe. But then there is the God, the supreme creator being that we find in these religious texts, which is very different from this concept. So I think I'm going to stop there and give it back to you to let you go where you want to go.
Great. And if we were to take let's talk about this. What are some of the books and descriptions that you could share with us here at the Leak Project that you've put into the film without giving too much away?
Well, I mean, I look at all kinds of different myths from around the world. Ones that I have personally have read have been like the Elish, Popol Vuh, the Ramayana. I mean, pretty much anything I can get my hands on. I have done a pretty thorough survey of different Summerian texts that obviously are translated into English. Chinese cosmology, Australian. I love anything that comes out of Australia because I feel like it is the most untouched, them and the Native American cosmology. And when you start looking at the gods and the myths and the stories that come forward, you find this level of consistency around the world where people will go, oh, well, it was part of their evolution, which I think is crap.
Oh, certainly. And yeah, I hear you. I certainly do. And there's a lot of, the Aborigines, there's so much mystery behind that. I appreciate you bringing up the Australian natives. How far back do their cultures go? Did you find some good data from there?
Well, I mean, what we know about the Australians is that, and this is not, this is coming from more empirical science. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Stephen and Evan Strong. They contend that humanity actually moved out of Australia first and not out of Africa, or there might have been two migrations, one from Australia, one from Africa. Anyway, but they have dated, the Mungo man was dated to about 60,000 BC. And so it is one of the oldest individuals found there. And they do realize that Australia was populated some 40 to 60,000 years ago. But one of the things about Australia is that it has been isolated. And people say, oh, well, they've had people come and share a more modern concept with them. But it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for the fact that, technologically speaking, they don't even have the bow and arrow. And that was like a really early concept that came into use like 18,000 BC. I mean, old. It's old. They were basically using clubs and boomerangs as their primary weapons. And so when you start looking at the things that they have in their culture, it never really advanced. And if a culture came, so let's say the Egyptians came, you would think that the indigenous population would have taken on some of their technology, not their beliefs first, but the technology. It would make life easier, but they didn't. So that's my thought on the whole thing.
And when you look at these prophecies, scriptures, and texts from around the world, and it talks about their gods, essentially,
mm-hmm.
Do you think that they were one species or one particular race? For example, the Anunnaki.
Great question. When you look at the mythic record, when you hear descriptions of the different gods, they have very distinct characteristics. And you find 5 very distinct characteristic gods. I call them kind of like the chief operating officers on the planet. You have the sky god, who we often associate with like Zeus, who is always depicted as being, white hair and the flowing beard and human, definitely human. We have these fertility gods that are half man, half snake, half man, half fish. So there's definitely this reptilian part to them. There was a group of gods that were the monsters. And they kind of encompassed a lot of different categories. Giants fell into this, dwarfs fell into this, and other creatures, depending on what culture. And there are other descriptors that tie to it, like they're always associated with the North. They're always associated with being the individuals who were the builders of the technology. So we hear about the lightning weapon that Zeus carried and, leveled mountains with. But he didn't blink it into appearance. It was created by these characters that lived in the North or were associated with the North. They were the master builders and the architects. And then we have the gods of the underworld, which there really aren't any depictions of. I joke around, everybody knew about them, but nobody talked about them. So when you say Anunnaki, that means, those who from heaven came, or whatever the translation is. But it's not necessarily describing what they look like. It just says they're from up there. So I don't think that, I don't have an issue using the term Anunnaki to talk about the guys that came from up there, but to say that we're talking about one species, not so much. I don't buy that. I think there have been multiple species that have been here.
Also, if you look at some of the ancient Vedic texts and Summerian cuneiform tablets, etc., these gods or beings are depicted, like you said, they've got these different animal parts, different reptilian parts, and some people speculate they literally look like that. It was genetic engineering. Some people say, no, that's a part of a symbolic reference or spiritual reference, and you can take the cultures into account as well. But one thing I find fascinating is I've done 2 interviews with guests that live on completely different sides of the country, and they described making contact with these ETs that they called the Elephant Men. And I think of the descriptions of Shiva's...
Ganesh?
Yeah, Ganesh, yes. And I'm wondering, could that possibly be the same being or the same type of being? Or are these guys just having incredible dreams and they're explaining their experiences?
Too much ayahuasca.
Yeah, are they loving that stuff, putting it in their breakfast cereal? But you can tell they were genuine. And the one guy that I remember talking to, he's shown me video footage of UFOs that he takes on a daily basis in New York. He's in the Bronx, and he'll go outside during the day, and he'll be people around him, and you'll see these balls of light changing colors and forms, and it's just crazy. So you can tell he believes in what he's saying, and I'm not saying that he's pulling a story on me either. So I'm not trying to, when I made that joke, kind of just, it was poking kind of fun, because what do you expect when you talk to people who say they see elephant people?
Yeah, and I've never heard of elephant people. India has some of the most interesting iconography around, and because Indra had 4 arms and 4 heads, but he wasn't considered a monster, and then there was the demon god of Lanka who had 50 heads, and Shiva had 6 arms, so they have these weird body configurations, although they're humanoid, so I'll give them that, they're humanoid. Ganesh, however, his story was, and I'm not an expert on him per se, but from what I understand, he was Indian human, but his head was chopped off, and so it was replaced by the head of an elephant. So that wasn't his natural state. And so, like I said, I've never heard of these elephant head people, but
I guess they're pretty common.
We live on a very strange planet, and there's more and more stuff coming forward, contemporary, that supports what we find in the mythic record. And I feel like that's one of the things that I'm bringing forward in my work is this is what they've been saying for years, and they call all of our ancestors crackpots, and these are these fanciful stories that are totally made up. But as we move forward and we get stories of reptilians or people that talk about the Summerians, those the bird people, but these other characters, we find them in the mythic record as if that's what's been going on for a long time. And so I find that it validates our contemporary UFO history.
Did you find scriptures and prophecies and data from all over the world and compile it in this holy deception?
Not in this. Where I compiled it was in my book, E.T. Chronicles, what Myth and Legend says about human origins. That was a much more thorough investigation into this topic. This video is an hour in length, and you really can only fit so much material. But one of the things that video lends that books don't lend is that it's really visual, so you can see it. It's not just words on a page and requiring your imagination. So, for example, one of the things I talk about are the weapons of the gods, and in particular, the lightning weapon that is wielded by Zeus. And I talk about where you find it with different gods around the world and stories that are tied to these different gods. And what's interesting is it's usually paralleled with a sky god who is in charge. And when you look at the images, that's where, to me, it just jumps forward. You look at the images, and they look the same. They look so similar. For example, Indra has what's called a Vihara, and it is a shaft. I should send you a picture, but anyway, but it's a shaft, and it has these 3 to 7 prongs on it. So, and it looks pretty deadly, and so it emitted a ray of light. So think of kind of like a phaser. And it could level mountains, kill people, do anything you want. It was the weapon without rival. Well, you take that picture and you look at the picture of Marduk. This is from a Summerian cylinder seal of Marduk on the back of Tiamat, the serpent, and he's holding this weapon, which is a 3-pronged weapon. You see Zeus, again, with this 3-pronged weapon. You find in the Americas that there are several gods that carry these lightning weapons that aren't 3-pronged, but they're these like shafts. They look like a stick, but you have images of Zeus, for example, who has something that looks kind of like a stick, or a shaft. And so I think the imagery that comes along with it just really drives it home.
Absolutely. And plus, a lot of people, just due to the time restraints and everything that's going on, if they can watch something over a period of an hour and a picture says 1,000 words sometimes, that could give them some great reference points. And I remember I went out to Myrtle Beach last year, and on the beach out there's this giant statue of Poseidon with the triple prong trifecta. Or what are they?
The trident.
The trident, yes, thank you. And I just got harped there for a second. I don't have my tinfoil hat on. So yeah, it was just beautiful. And I was like, wow, this is actually, if you go and look at some ancient texts and scriptures, you can go way back. I mean, so even way before, not Egypt, but Greece, I think, as well, correct?
Oh, very much so. I mean, some of the earliest texts, written texts that we have come from the Summerians, and they date to about 2500 BC. But we don't know how old the stories are. We just know that they were written down in 2500 BC. And the same in India. Their writing system goes back, and I don't have a date, but far, really far. But again, we don't know how old the narrative is. And the part that kills me, Rex, the part that kills me the most is the notion that, they say that these stories are fictitious, or they're stories of fantasy, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is just this made-up narrative. The Ramayana, it's just this made-up narrative. Now, is it embellished? Possibly. Not going to argue with that. But why would someone document and write down this story if it was just a science, I like to say a Danielle Steele novel? Why write it down? I mean, the Ramayana is huge. I mean, it's 3 books long. It took me like 6 months to get through it because it's just not an easy read. The Mahabharata is even worse, and it's 15 books long that are not skinny books. Why would someone with this newly learned skill take the time to write down something that was make-believe? It just doesn't make any sense. They would take the time to write down things that were important to them. I mean, one of the things that the Summerians, they were very good at documenting, especially their legal stuff. And so many of the clay cylinders or clay tablets that have actually been found in Iraq that were Babylonian, Assyrian, and Sumerian are actually legal documents. And there are thousands of these. And so they were good at documenting, but they were also pretty fastidious. They were very careful about getting things on paper and having it be legal and right and correct. And it just doesn't, it seems very out of character for them to spend their time documenting a fantasy, because no one could read it. Only the scribes could actually read it. The holy men, the priests, the ones that were educated could read it.
One of the things that I find interesting is there's 2 schools of thought with the Anunnaki and the Sumerian tablets. And one of them is the Anunnaki are from outer space, and then the other one is they're no more alien than we are. So I have found it interesting. I would like to actually spend some time and literally read the translations, but I heard they're available on Google and other avenues. But how do you know the translations are accurate and haven't been skewed somehow? Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Mauro Bellino. He is just a really nice guy. He's written several books. He actually worked for the Vatican for years as a translator. And one of his books, called The Book That Will Forever Change the Way You Look at the Bible, he describes the Old Testament that he translated from Hebrew as literally ancient alien stuff. We're talking ancient astronauts, literally paralleling what Zachariah Sitchin and what Gerald Clark and others say. And some of these documents that you bring up, I would find it fascinating if you could find references of Enki, Enlil, and some of these other big players in Australia or other locations that maybe I haven't heard of before.
Well, I mean, when you start getting into these other locations, I mean, this is where it starts getting a little weird, is that there were only so many cultures that had writing. And so the Summerians, the Indians, the Egyptians have a long-standing written tradition. The Maya had a long-standing written tradition, but with the Maya, we have 4 original texts. The Popol Vuh was actually penned after the Spanish had conquested Mesoamerica. So even though it's old and it was written by someone who was Mayan, it's not one of their original texts. So there's a little, you know, I'm not going to go there. And everything else that we have has really been documented by ethnographers, these early anthropologists that went to Australia. They went out into the plains of the America and spent time with the Native Americans, writing down their history, writing down their rituals and traditions and cosmology. And so that's really the base we have to work with. It's not perfect, but it is what we have, which is sad.
Well,
but, you know, can I throw in a but?
Yeah, please.
You know, one of the things that people don't, well, Laird's Grant gets into this a little bit, you know, but there's the whole notion of the pictographs and the, you know, the little scratchy pictures that you see that they did on rocks. You know, so there wasn't a written language. It didn't say, and on Friday, you know, October 7th, 2016, blah, 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 blah. I mean, they didn't document that way, but they would put images and they would put symbols down. So in the United States, for example, if you see a cross, you know, the first thing that I think would come to 99% of people is that it has something to do with Christianity. And if you're Christian, it has to do with Jesus dying on the cross. So there's a whole story tied to just that image. Or if you see a swastika, everybody's mind goes, you know, to Nazi Germany. And there's a whole story that's tied to it. And I think that's how they passed on the information. They passed on the tradition. In my other movie, Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, which really looks at that concept of imagery in general. One of the things that I talk about in there, just as an example, and I'm going to do this example on you, Rex. So I'm going to describe a person, okay, just based on their iconography, on the characteristics that are often tied to this person. And when I say enough, you know, either shout the name out or start to laugh, because usually people will start to chuckle, okay? But laugh loud enough so I can hear, okay?
Gotcha.
Okay, so who I'm describing is a portly older man, and he has a big white beard, and often he's depicted
Yahweh?
wearing a... No.
Dang it. Okay.
Oh, no, well, let me get the next sentence out and you'll know who it is.
Okay.
And he's often depicted wearing a red suit with a big black belt.
Santa Claus.
Yay!
There we go. Hey, you know what's weird? If you take Santa and just change those 2 letters around at the end, you've got Satan with the red
Satan
coming into the window at night. Would you like a present? It's kind of creepy if you think about it, isn't it?
Oh, I know. But, you know, so when we see a picture of Santa, what do we know? What do we know? I mean, let's break that down for a second. We know his name. We know where he lives. We know what he does. If you want to see him, when's the best time to, you know, that he might be coming around? We know how he travels. We know the names of his reindeers. We know, you know, information about his wife. We know all of this stuff just based on that one picture. And that's how they transmitted information in the past.
I think that's a great way to bring things up because, as I mentioned earlier, a picture says 1,000 words, and with all the different barriers of language, culture, society, if you've got a specific picture, people can resonate with that not only at the conscious level, but also at the subconscious level.
Mm-hmm. Well, but we also know the backstory. You don't have to read it in a book, although it might be more detailed, and people that are more knowledgeable, or it's part of their job to know more information, would have more information. But everybody would have this base level of understanding just based on that one image. And so when we see these pictographs, in Chaco Canyon or anywhere around the world.
That's a great area, by the way. Love it out there.
It is. I
Right by
think there
Cuba.
is there are these inherent meanings tied to them that have just been lost to us in today's society.
Yeah, and it's tough to even get into Chaco Canyon. I mean, just the way that they've got the roads set up at the national park, it's very difficult on your vehicle. I watched this lady pulling a trailer with her car, and it was hysterical. Just boom, 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 boom. But, I went out there, and I certainly appreciated the way that it was like a capital for many of these natives, and I don't know, a lot of the things were lined up with the stars, and there was a specific location there that once the time was at a specific, I don't know what the time was, but you could see this dagger actually form on the walls of these rocks, and they certainly knew what they were doing. Yeah.
Well, I had gone to Petroglyph State Park. There's a couple of them in New Mexico, and went to this one, and it was like a canyon. It was like a horseshoe-shaped canyon, and there was a walking trail along the whole canyon. And as you walked, you would get to these areas where there would be little clusters of petroglyphs, and then you'd walk, and there wouldn't be any, and there would be another cluster of petroglyphs. And my takeaway. Oh, and when you got to the base of the horseshoe, up at the top of the slope was this giant rock with all of these petroglyphs on it, which had I sat and meditated up there because there was definitely this energy and presence about it. And my takeaway was where the different clusters of petroglyphs was really like, this is where this clan goes to, and this is where this clan goes to, and they were markers for different groups. That was my takeaway. Anyway.
Sure, absolutely. And let me ask you as well, when you really started putting this stuff together, did that change the way you thought overall about life after death and just who we are as people?
Not really, because I had been studying that material. I mean, I work, my day job is working as a medical intuitive and energy healer, and I've written a couple of books that don't really delve into life after death, but delve into the concept of energy and subtle energy, and we're more than just a physical body. And so my and Kabbalistic traditions and the whole notion of chakras and reincarnation. I mean, so that was, I'd already been down that road for a very long time, so that didn't change. What changed in me after looking at all of this information is I went from, I'm going to say believing that, or being up in the air, that it was an earlier civilization that and an earlier advanced civilization that predated humanity, to it was extraterrestrials or another race of beings that were not human, or human in the way we know them as being human.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm going to be quiet.
No, I was just going to say, I wonder if we have been manipulated, our DNA, and I've heard these stories before, but even if I hadn't heard those stories before about, Zechariah Sitchin, et cetera, and the Anunnaki manipulating our DNA for gold, I think there's a lot more to it personally. I think that we were way beyond these primitive cavemen that walked around going, I think there was a lot more to it back then, but certainly there's some people that don't. But I think that we're almost suppressed. There's something that was taken away from us, like our certain intuitive abilities, psychic abilities, sixth sense type opportunities, I feel have been suppressed And now that some people are waking up, I think that the powers that be are doing certain things to keep the masses suppressed, not everybody, but with the foods and the medicines and the stuff that they're even putting in the atmosphere. I've got a friend that has some insider info on people, she's a nurse, she works at a specific blood bank or whatever, where people get their blood tested all the time, and many people are having these really serious vitamin D and vitamin K deficiencies. And they're not living in Ethiopia, or they're not living in Iceland. I shouldn't say the reason I said Ethiopia is because they don't, a lot of them out there don't have a lot of nutrients and foods, but Iceland, there's not as much sun out there. So my point is, I'm wondering if the chemtrails themselves actually have something to do, or the geoengineering is blocking very important vitamin D from the sun.
I don't know. I mean, I know that people don't really go out. I remember as a kid, my mom kicked us outside. And people don't go out, they don't walk, they don't go to the park, they don't ride bikes. And so, the vitamin D part, I can kind of understand just based on our lifestyle. We just don't. Going to your car and into the building, I don't think is necessarily enough sunlight for what your body needs. I never looked at the chemtrail part, but that is pretty interesting. But, when you talk to individuals or study indigenous cultures, wherever it is, North America, South America, Australia, the Philippines, any place where, original tradition existed, they were so much more in touch with nature. They were more in touch with spirit. They were more in touch with, what we would consider God. They were more intuitive. We are so shut off because everything that is part of our nature, we've been told, is crap.
I agree.
And so, people are waking up, they're learning to meditate, they're doing this stuff, but we had been doing it for a long time, and it's really been taken away from us. But I don't think it was the gods. I think it was, all of that changed, that whole mindset changed with the rise of agriculture. That's the only place that I can really tie it to, because when we lived in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we were still very ritual-based. We were really still taboo-based. And when we started living in the agricultural lifestyle and moving into cities, that's where things became more, I'm going to say, indoctrinated into creating societal norms. And that's really where the dogma kicked in, big time, and shifted what we're doing and who we are, and moved us more away from our natural self, our inner being, our inner self, into something different.
Absolutely. And, I had Neil Slade on the Leak Project the other day. He's an expert on the brain, and he was breaking down the three different parts, the reptilian, the mammalian, and what some people call the super mammalian, essentially. And a lot of times the media, politicians, the powers that be, or just some very influential people that like to make monies off of people's fight or flight mode, they'll put them into that fear factor, into that reptilian mindset. And we've got so many opportunities, the fact that we do have a trifecta brain, to activate other creative influences. And I look at some of this reptilian gods, like the ancient serpent gods, the reptilians in antiquity that you talk a lot about on the Just Energy radio show. And I think to myself, these reptilians that are being portrayed, are they like representations of our inner self? Are they actual beings? And maybe, what's your thought on that? Let's get into this.
I mean, I think that they were actual beings. You find this notion of a half man, half fish character around the world. They are always tied to the water. They always are seen as living in the oceans, living in streams, living somewhere tied to water. Most cultures connect them with being a fertility god. And one of the other attributes that is tied to this god is that he's a trickster god. So like in Norse cosmology, Loki would be this trickster god. But in the same time, his goal was he was the creator of humanity, the one responsible for the creation of humanity, but also for the care of humanity. And so this god is the one that, like Prometheus and Loki both, gave humanity fire. So it was not, they didn't listen to the guys in charge, the big boss. they did what they felt was right and were often punished for it. And so that's why they were often characterized as being a trickster, because they didn't follow the rules. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that David Icke suggests that when they gave us technology, whether it be fire, whether it be how to dig roots with a stick, that's comes out of Australia. I mean, that's part of their mythology. How to dig roots with a stick. Okay, how to circumcise. Basic things that were very early in the culture, in the education of humanity. He contends that that was part of the reptilian takeover for the human race. I don't have a belief one way or the other. I don't have enough data, and I can see it on both sides. I mean, I think it's good that we've gotten technology, but then the outcome has been not so good when you look at the world today. So, yeah, I'm a little up in the air on making a decision about that one way or the other, whether it's a good
tough.
thing
Yeah.
or a bad thing.
I hear you. Absolutely. I would love to know more about you're a soul healer, you're a spiritual worker, and you've got so much knowledge in that. Have you ever reached out to any specific God forms, or what someone might look at as an archangel, some type of deity or force that's at a higher level than this physical plane?
Well, I mean, I believe in God.
That's
not
a big term, though.
Not the guy you find in the Bible. How's that? But more of that creative force. Again, as I said earlier, what that is, I don't know, but I know that that's what I believe in. I have communicated. I like to think that I've been communicating with God. There's, that little conspiratorial mind that I have sometimes to go, well, if that communication is not with God, that I don't know who it's with. And if it's Fred the janitor on Zeta Reticuli, I'm a little scared. Then I joke around. It's Fred. And it's interesting because when I feel like I'm receiving, and I'm going to say divine inspiration, it will come into me this way. It will come in on a 7th chakra, in through the crown, into me. And I can tell that energy flow, so I recognize the vibration. But then I have what I call the peanut gallery. And so if I'm doing a session, and if I'm talking, they're like the ultimate backseat drivers, I swear to God. And they kind of sit over here, and I never ask who they are. I don't really care. I know that they give good information because they have proven themselves out over all the years I've been working. And they just give commentary. So if they don't like what I say, they'll be like, well, blah, 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 blah. The peanut gallery. And so that's kind of my thing when I study concepts that come out of Judaism in particular. There is this rabbi guy, whether you want to call him a spirit guide or whatever. I just know he's a rabbi guy because I will read something and I will get these downloads of information or insight. And it's very Jewish, and I don't know how else to explain it. But it seems like only when I'm really studying information in that tradition do I get these kind of, that he kind of comes in closer and works with me. And he's really the only individual that I will say that I know I work with as an individual, because I kind of don't care. I don't need to know their names. They have not come forward telling me who they are. And we have a great relationship.
Nice. Maybe I could ask you also about Thoth. That's one deity that I've always been fascinated with. I've had a lot of questions on Leak Project as well. And have you found any cool info on Thoth?
Egyptian cosmology is probably one of the toughest to work through. And I think in particular because the culture has extended over 3,000 years and has evolved so much over time. And I think Egyptology really requires a very intense study just into it. And I'm saying this for a very specific reason. I like looking at the really old text, whatever the original text is, And so those are going to come from the Old Kingdom. But when you find texts like the Pyramid Text or the Egyptian Book of the Dead and things like that, you don't really know where they're coming from. And so you can't put them into this chronology of evolution, or chronology of geography, because the culture had moved from one area to the other. And so I just find it a little bit troubling. For example, in the Old Kingdom, Anubis was the god of the underworld. He watched over the resting place of the souls, and he was taken over by Osiris. And so what do you pay attention to? Do you look at the myths of Osiris, being cut up, and, that whole reincarnation story that's tied to him? Because and is that story actually an old story that was tied to a different god that his name was put on? It's just very confusing. Sumerian cosmology is so much easier, and some of these other ones are so much easier because there's a very finiteness to them.
Have you read the Emerald Tablets?
Parts of it. I kind of didn't buy them.
Okay.
Well, if somebody says that it's channeled information, then I automatically go, maybe not so much. I mean, because I don't believe that there are actually these tablets that have been found. And the character of Thoth, he was the educator of humanity. He, taught humanity all of these skills. But as we go back to what we were talking about earlier, excuse me, who are the gods that taught humanity the skills of writing, how to dig up roots with a stick? It was the reptilian gods. So what do you do with that?
It's extremely confusing, and the way that it's all put together, unless you're there seeing it happen, and even then you can question what you're seeing, you almost have to go with your gut and intuition, and that's why I stay so agnostic towards certain things, because I really don't know. And is my gut right 99% of the time? Yeah, I mean, it is. Most of the time, if my intuition tells me something's accurate, later on down, I can, there will be validation to prove that. But it's just a fascinating world that we live in, and I certainly would like to know what this stuff was all about. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could hop in a time machine, go back several thousand years, and if these Anunnaki really did come down from space in these giant ships and do these incredible things, and the way that the pyramids were built, Machu Picchu and others, it'd just be amazing to see that take place. But we can only go on myths and what we've learned about and read. So it's nice to put this all together. And the fact that you do work with, kind of the spiritual aspect of things, but you're a skeptic too, I appreciate that, because it's like dual forces. It's like that's the opposite, and it's working together, creating a third strand of antiquity, possibly. You're agnostic and a Gnostic, like myself. I want to know, but I don't know. So it's kind of like you're fighting yourself all the time, trying to get to the truth and the answer, but it's going to come, because the truth will prevail. And these are all great pieces and bits of data that I feel have their place in this giant jigsaw puzzle of reality. And once it all gets put together in this life and beyond, I think it'll have important consequences.
Exactly.
Well, this is awesome. I certainly appreciate everything that you do, and I just want to give a couple shout-outs for your work. Go to soulhealer.com, justenergyradio.com, also Just Energy Radio on YouTube, as well as Dr. Rita Louise on Facebook. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us tonight before we close out?
Sure. We've been talking about my new movie, Holy Deception, and it just released on Amazon as well as Vimeo. It's available for, digital download, rental. You can buy it. But, Rex, I have a really cool but. One of the things that I love about Vimeo is that they give you the opportunity to offer promotional things. And so one of the things that I've just turned on for your listeners is if they want to rent or buy Holy Deception on Vimeo, there's a coupon code that they can use to get 50% off the rental. So I think if they rent it, it's like $1.50. Rex, $1.50.
That's cheaper than a bottled water.
I know. Well, I was like, it's just going to be available for a limited period of time, and I just want people to go. Holy Deception on Vimeo. Again, it's on Amazon for Amazon digital download. It's $2.99 on Amazon, which is still a bargain. And so I hope people watch it and enjoy it and question. Don't just accept things that people tell you, even, people in the know that post things on Facebook. Question them, read what they have to say, run it through your filters, because, we're all on this journey together. None of us know. None of us have been there. We weren't there thousands of years ago to experience it, and we're all out there trying to seek truth. So find your truth.
Right on. Find your truth. That's a very good statement there. This has been great. I really appreciate it. And also, I want to just let our audience know, there's been several emails I've got recently where people are saying, Rex, I listen to Leak Project a lot, and it's certainly waking me up to certain things, and I want to wake up other people, but I don't want to be the person that sounds like the preacher. Well, here's some cool options for you guys. There is a really cool website called mcartwork.org, and you can get these custom logos and decals made up, and if there's a certain slogan or saying or image that you want to portray, you can get it done. You can put it on your car, you can put it in your house, you can make it a corner piece. I mean, you can do all sorts of different signs and decals and different opportunities. So just check that out, mcartwork.org. And also go to leakproject.com, become a contributing member at Leak Project, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also make sure to subscribe to Dr. Rita Louise's YouTube channel. And hey, thanks, Dr. Rita Louise. This has been amazing. I appreciate everything.
Well, I love coming on your show. You have a great show. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And so do you. Now, when can people actually get access to your show? Because you've got, is it once a week or is it once a day?
It's once a week, so it airs live. Well, not live, because all the shows are pre-recorded. So the audio portion of the show, I have to kind of break it down. The audio portion of the show airs on a couple of different networks. The first airing is on Thursday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if they go to the justenergyradio.com website, there's links to the different times it airs, because it airs during different time zones around the world on 2 different networks. So it airs on a couple of different days. And then they can always go to my YouTube channel and watch the show there. It obviously gets put on the Just Energy Radio webpage, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and it's video. Like your show, it's video, so they can access the video either on the Just Energy Radio website or on the Just Energy Radio YouTube channel.
Well, that's fantastic. All right. Folks, have a wonderful evening. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. Holy deception, gods or aliens, technology or miracles, Archons, Anunnaki, Reptilians, fallen angels, ancient astronauts, celestial bodies, Summerians, Egyptians, Greek mythos, Pantheon, Zeus, Marduk, Dr. Rita Louise, latest Leak Project. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Rita Louise with us from soulhealer.com, justenergyradio.com, Just Energy Radio on YouTube, and Dr. Rita Louise on Facebook. Now, we talked to Dr. Rita a while back. We had a great conversation, and she has a new film coming out in just a few days called Holy Deception. So we're going to dive into that, and great to speak with you. How the heck are you?
I'm doing great, Rex. Nice coming back on the show, and you are my first interview on this new project, so I'm just so excited to be here and get to, release it with you. Yay!
Yeah, this is great, and I had a chance to, watch some of it. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but the information that I got so far is amazing, and I think it's going to do really well once it's released. If you would, for our audience, let's talk about it. What have you compiled in this that will really make people sit back and just go, this is incredible?
Well, I think, in the biggest picture of the whole thing, one of the things that I give the viewer is I make them ask questions. There are things that we believe. There are traditions and concepts that we were all brought up with. Especially what I cover in this film is our notion of God. And I've done a number of films, and the comment that I'll get from some people is, but she didn't give an answer. And it's like, well, it's not my job to give an answer. It's my job to make you question yourself and dig within yourself and come up with your own answers. And so what I do is provide information. I mean, I'm really big on looking at mythology and customs and history and the archaeological record and those kinds of things, and providing the viewer with this bed of information so that they can make their decision, because our beliefs are our beliefs, and it's not up for me to tell you what to believe. You need to decide what you want to believe.
That's a good point, because I wanted to bring up that a lot of times on Leak Project, people will leave these silly comments in the comment section and say stuff like, oh, well, Rex, you tell us what you believe. You're still agnostic. Why don't you believe in this yet? And it's really not about me. It's about the person that's watching the film or the podcast or listening to the archives, and they can make up their own decision. It's not really up to us as a journalist or somebody that's bringing this data to the table necessarily to come up with a specific solution for them, unless you bring that up at the very beginning. So I appreciate that. And I've read through so many ancient texts, like, obviously the Old Testament and the books in the Old Testament, but also the Nag Hammadi treaties that talk about the Archons, many books that were taken out of the Abrahamic canon. And I read through it, and what some people used to call gods or angels or, things coming from the heavens, I think to myself, this is describing some type of technology. Your film also really correlates a lot of that as well.
Well, exactly. And I think, just, to kind of go into this, I think we really need to talk about what our notion of God is first, to kind of get into more of the meat of, some of these religious texts and philosophical texts that we're really talking about, but, like the Archons and stuff, because everyone has, regardless of where you are in the world, this basic belief in a divine being of, this omnipotent creator. I'm kind of a Trekkie, and one of my personal favorite characters on Star Trek is the character Q from Next Generation, and he was on Voyager, which he was pretty funny on Voyager. But anyway, and he was omnipotent, and he would snap his finger and a universe would be created, or he would change his outfit, and he was omnipotent. And our viewpoint of God is of this omnipotent creator. Now, whether people believe he has a form or a sex, whether it's just a consciousness, an energy, or a vibration, I don't know. I don't claim to know. And, when my kids were young, I would just say, it's just God, because it's something I don't have the answer to. And I don't think anybody on Earth has a real understanding or can have an understanding from our viewpoint, because we're not omnipotent. We don't understand everything that's going on in the universe. We just know our three-dimensional universe. But then there is the God, the supreme creator being that we find in these religious texts, which is very different from this concept. So I think I'm going to stop there and give it back to you to let you go where you want to go.
Great. And if we were to take let's talk about this. What are some of the books and descriptions that you could share with us here at the Leak Project that you've put into the film without giving too much away?
Well, I look at all kinds of different myths from around the world. Ones that I have personally read have been like the Elish, Popol Vuh, the Ramayana. Pretty much anything I can get my hands on. I have done a pretty thorough survey of different Summerian texts that obviously are translated into English. Chinese cosmology, Australian. I love anything that comes out of Australia, because I feel like it is the most untouched, them and the Native American cosmology. And when you start looking at the gods and the myths and the stories that come forward, you find this level of consistency around the world where people will go, oh, well, it was part of their evolution, which I think is crap.
Oh, certainly. And yeah, I hear you. I certainly do. And there's a lot of, the Aborigines. There's so much mystery behind that. I appreciate you bringing up the Australian natives. How far back do their cultures go? Did you find some good data from there?
Well, what we know about the Australians is that, and this is not, this is coming from more empirical science. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Stephen and Evan Strong. They contend that humanity actually moved out of Australia first and not out of Africa, or there might have been two migrations, one from Australia, one from Africa. Anyway, but they have dated, the Mungo Man was dated to about 60,000 BC.